So I'm sitting in a hover at 1,000 feet and I get the clearance, and I remember the aircraft, Hotel Papa Kilo, cleared direct Ardmore. As soon as I pulled in a little bit of power and nosed over, it started running real rough, and I realised something was wrong, and so I entered an auto rotation.
Welcome aboard the HiflyMedia Podcast, dedicated to sharing the stories and experiences of the amazing people who make aviation happen. From pilots like me to engineers, air traffic controllers and others, I'll explore their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced and the triumphs they've achieved. My name is Damien, and I'll be your host. Whether you're a seasoned aviation enthusiast or new to the field, I invite you to join me as we take off on this journey of discovery. Joining us on the HiflyMedia Podcast today is Nick Bowie, a successful entrepreneur, passionate hunter, and holder of a commercial helicopter pilot licence. Nick obtained his licence in New Zealand when he was just a little younger, and is here to share his insights and experiences with us. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's good to see you again. Nick and I actually go back probably a bit over 10 years now. And I didn't know Nick was a pilot, and we were talking one day and I mentioned that, I had flown and I'd done this, that and the other. Nick's like, oh, I'm a pilot too, except I went fixed wing, he went helicopter.
Yeah.
I know that you grew up in New Zealand.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you lived, and perhaps how that shaped your interest in aviation, and in particular, what inspired your passion in aviation.
Okay, sure. So I grew up in Auckland, New Zealand, and my dad was probably the first person who inspired me into aviation. He worked for Air New Zealand. He actually applied for the Air Force when he was straight out of school, and his eyesight was too bad and he failed the medical. Back then there was no such thing as laser surgery or anything like that, so he flat out got rejected there. So took the second option and went to Air New Zealand, but was the in charge of ground supervisor stuff on the traffic side of things. So when you check your bag in, back in those days, he was in charge of weight and balance on all the aircraft, and the pilot just signed it off. So he was very mathematically minded, worked his way up through the ranks, and was one of the bosses at what used to be NAC, National Airways Corporation in New Zealand, turned into Air New Zealand, because Air New Zealand used to be the international carrier and NAC was the domestic carrier.
Right.
And so he worked there and worked his way up there. But yeah, back before there was, weight and balance apps and computers. Yeah. So from the 1950s onwards, and in Auckland where we lived, we were right on the flight path between Whenuapai and Auckland International, where they used to, the airspace as I came to know it, they would track almost directly over our house to fly over the Auckland Tower and then off down to Waiheke or wherever else they were going. So every day we had Iroquois and the small Wasps that the Navy used to use. And so I developed a love of helicopters. But my dad used to love the fixed wing side of things.
Yeah, right.
And he used to go, all his friends at Air New Zealand were pilots, and his best man at his wedding was the chief pilot at Pacific Airways for a number of years. That's another story I could tell you about. But we used to have a batch on Waiheke Island in Auckland, and we used to catch the Goose amphibious aircraft across there all the time. And my dad knew all the pilots, so it was always, if we needed to get over there quickly, he would call one of his mates and say, hey, can we hitch a lift over to Waiheke Island? Yeah, right. And so, yeah, we spent our summers over there and spent a bit of time in small aircraft and things like that. So yeah, that's where it all started. My dad had plane books and magazines and all that sort of stuff littered all over the house. I could tell you the difference between a, Messerschmitt 109 and a Spitfire, which a lot of people couldn't do by the time they were 3 years old. But yeah, I had every plane identification down for the Second World War, because I was born in 1970. So that's only, 30 odd years after the Second World War.
I've got to ask you then, what's your favourite aeroplane movie? I know that's a bit off the reservation today.
Aeroplane movie. Okay, it's changed recently.
Please don't say Top Gun.
Maverick. I mean, as trashy as it was a cool, it was a cool movie.
100%.
But I grew up with the Dam Busters, Mosquito Squadron, things like that. Battle of Britain. They were the Sunday afternoon movies that used to play when I was a little fella, and my dad and I used to sit there and watch those movies. That was before VCRs, so if there was a movie coming up, you'd look it up in the paper and things like that, and it would be like, "Hey, Dad, Dam Busters is on again this Sunday. 7:00. Can I stay up and watch it with you?" Type of thing.
That's
as a
cool.
small kid. So, yeah. Top Gun, 1984. I went and saw it at the movies.
I was in Ralph Base Amberley Cinema.
Okay, well, that's a cool one.
It was grade. I think it was 84 or 85. It was at the cinema there. So I was in like grade 4, something like that.
Well, I saw it at Mid-City Cinemas in Auckland, downtown Auckland, with a couple of mates of mine.
It's almost like for an aviation tragic, it's almost like, if you say to my mum, "Where were you when you found out John F. Kennedy had been murdered?" She'll tell you exactly where she was.
I know.
What she was doing.
Yeah.
It's like us with Top Gun.
Well, here's another aviation fact for you that I found out, and this is hilarious. You'll laugh at this, but I was conceived on the day or the night that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon.
July 20, 1969.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And so my mum told me that, and I was like, "Mum,
too much information."
Too much information, but it's a cool fact.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So that, I can obviously see how that, your dad's history there, probably not too dissimilar to my father being in the Air Force. You've obviously got that connection.
Yeah, yeah.
So Auckland Airport, was that civilian and military?
No. So Whenuapai Airport is the military airport in New Zealand. It's Hobsonville area. Whenuapai, Hobsonville. One is the helicopter base for the RNZAF, and the other is the Whenuapai is known as the. Now, this is going back to when I was flying, because I think Hobsonville's kind of shut down now. They've moved all the NH90s down to Ohakia.
Right.
But when I was flying and when I grew up, Whenuapai was where all the C-130s, the Orions and the Andovers were stationed, and all the Iroquois and Wasps were at Hobsonville. Now, they're adjoining air bases. Right. One's across the road from the other.
Gotcha.
But Auckland Air, so my dad, so Air New Zealand started, or NAC started at Whenuapai. Then they built Auckland International and Domestic Airport. So my dad started at Whenuapai, and then they all moved across there. Another side note is my mum and dad met at Air New Zealand, or NAC. My mum was a hostess on DC-3s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
cool.
You had no chance.
No chance. Yeah. Tragic from the beginning.
As long as you weren't conceived on a DC-3.
No, I don't think so.
Rightio. So you've seen these, the Hueys and the Wasps as a young fella.
Yep.
And it's obviously sparked your interest in flying rotary wing.
Yep.
How did that all come about?
Okay, so when I was 21, just kind of said, this is what I want to do. And my eyesight was not very good either. I'd carried on the genetic woeful eyesight, the short-sightedness. But to become a pilot, a civilian pilot, I looked at the military but didn't qualify because of my eyesight still.
Yeah.
So this is 1992 at that point, and so didn't qualify for the military, so I knew that was not an option, and so I looked into becoming a commercial pilot. And at the time, I went out to Ardmore. Ardmore's like it's the busiest airfield in New Zealand because it does a lot of training, and they had a lot of contracts, overseas contracts there at the time. So fixed wing was just like really, really busy. And I did an intro flight in a Robinson R22. Just went out there. They had a radio station. Had come out, pay $30, do an intro flight and see how you like it. Well, I went and did that intro flight, and I was hooked. I was like, I'm not interested in flying little planes. I'm interested in flying these helicopters. This is very difficult, but, and of course the sales guys tell you that there's a market for all the, if you get your license, you'll get a job, and, you just have to work hard, sweep a few floors and things like that. And
it'll all work out. So I actually went and got a loan. There was no student loans back then. They happened 5 or 6 years after I got my commercial license. And so I was very much go off and get a massive overdraft and paid my way. Far out.
And started flying. I could tell you in my logbook what date and time I did the intro flight. the 2nd of November, 1992.
1992.
And a little R-22. And that's the last time I flew an R-22 for many years.
Yeah, right.
R-22s were not very popular back when, in that time. They were considered unsafe, a toy, not something that you do your flight training in.
Yeah, right.
And so I did my initial flight at Ardmore Flying School, and they only had an R-22, and then they had an old Hughes 500 C model, and those were the only 2 helicopters they had access to, and I wanted to fly a real helicopter. So I went across the road, across the airfield, and introduced myself at aviation college.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Do you remember much about that initial flight?
Yeah, I do. I remember. Yeah, it was southeasterly, and he flew at low level into what I knew as the TALO, the takeoff and landing operations area. I don't think they use what's called TALOs here in Australia. I've never seen one. It was specifically for helicopters, and so he manoeuvred the helicopter into that area very quickly, and then said, "Right, grab the cyclic and see if you can hold it there." And so he gave me the cyclic, and all of a sudden we started drifting backwards and to the left. And I kind of went, "Am I doing that? I'm not, And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "I've got it, and I have control," and pushed us back to that spot. And they said, "Have another crack." And I kind of went, and I started drifting to the left again, and backwards and to the left. And I thought, wow, this is really difficult and challenging. And then he gave me the pedals, and I was better on the pedals because we were facing into wind and it was actually blowing. So it was kind of like, for me, he said, "You've got that pedal." And I pushed the pedal, and he goes, "I give it a little bit more." And so I was able to maneuver with the pedals, and then he gave me the collective, and we went straight up and straight down and all the things that instructors, I realized that I was trying to kill him.
A few what do you call them? Pilot-induced oscillations.
That's
going
right,
on.
Yeah. So that was my introduction, and I thought, what a challenge.
Yeah.
But then I wanted to. I'd done a bit of research, spoken to a few flight schools and things like that, and then realised that Robinsons back then were not very popular with a lot of the flight schools. And so I looked at 300s, Hughes 300s or Schweitzer 269C models. They looked like a helicopter when you sat in them. They had the cyclic between the legs, cyclic trim and things like that. And so everything about them seemed more like a helicopter to me. So I signed up.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So can you tell us a bit about, you've done your commercial, what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was a little bit smart back then, but when I signed up to do my commercial, I had them say to me that they would employ me, because they say, it's easy to get a job if you look. And I said, well, will you employ me when I'm done? And they said, yeah, we will let you do all our commercial work. So I was like, cool. I don't know how much commercial work that would be. It ended up being reasonable. I'd do all the maintenance flying. I'd do all the repositions. So we had a hangar, any maintenance flying that needed to be done, compass swings and things like that. I would do all that. Aircraft comes out after a 50-hour check. I would take it for a quick blad around the circuit, things like that. So I was clocking up 0.1, 0.2 at a time. Yeah. And so I would clean the aircraft. It was just a basic hangar boy job type of thing, but there were 2 of us doing it. One focused on the fixed wing side, and they thought it was a bonus that they had me to help them with the rotary side. Yeah. And so
you were about 22 by now?
No, I would have been 23.
23.
Yeah. It took me 7.5 months to do my commercial, and a lot of that is because of rain delays and weather delays and things like that. And it really good in New Zealand is the fact that sometimes it's like it's raining and you're training. It's a good time to go flying, because you learn to fly in weather. It's no good being here on the Sunshine Coast learning to fly because you're going to be 300 days of sunshine.
Well, that's it. The chief flying instructor, when I was training up in Toowoomba, he said if you can fly out of Toowoomba, you can fly out of anywhere in Australia because of the winds and the clouds over the top of the range and so on and so forth.
100%.
But anyway,
well, that's the same. If you can learn to fly in Ardmore, you're 10 minutes from the Hanua Ranges. You're half an hour from the Kaimai Ranges, which they go up to 4,000 feet. There's mountain flying within a stone's throw. There's coastal. There's, you've got a big Venturi from mostly west to east, but you've got rain, 300 days of the year as opposed to, 300 days of sunshine. It can be sunny on the North Shore and snowing an hour south and close to Raglan, So yeah, different temperatures and 4 seasons in one day and things like that. So a really good place to learn to fly. I did all the commercial work, did scenic tours, did dropping people off to wineries and in the early days, heli fishing.
So was that in the 300 or were you?
Yeah, I was doing 300 stuff. I did a little bit in the Jet Ranger as well when I did my type rating in the Jet Ranger. Believe it or not, back then, if you couldn't afford a squirrel to take you out to Great Barrier Island to go fishing, you sure as heck could afford a Hueys 300 for the day.
Yeah, yeah.
And so lots of people were doing it.
Yeah, right.
It's not that safe travelling for half an hour over water, but you didn't have to have floats. You could just have a life jacket on and things like that. And so, yeah, it's a little bit cowboyish.
Oh, man, that just makes me wonder. Well, obviously, you practiced auto rotations, and I'm assuming you never practiced an auto rotation into water.
No, but you get told which side to move the cyclic to in the event of a ditching. So if you have to ditch, you want to push the mast in a certain direction depending on which way the blades are turning to prevent the main transmission coming through the cockpit type of thing and killing your passenger or yourself or whoever's in it. So you learn that sort of stuff, and it is one of those considerations that you go through in your head mentally. What would I do? You constly, if I have an auto rotation now, if I have an engine failure right now, where am I going? What am I going to do? And it's just one of those things that it's drummed into you, and it's drummed into you for a reason. And by the time you got 100, because the commercial licenses back then were 150 hours. Yeah. You did your sling load, you did all your night stuff, and low level was just part of it. There was no 105 hour option back then. It was 150 hours. And as most guys will tell you, by the time you're 150 hours, you've done so many auto rotations, you can hit that spot in that aircraft. And if you're going to go for a range auto, your decision making is really good at 150 hours. I think for a young pilot at that time, you're ready for a check ride. You've done so many.
Yeah.
But you are constantly, regardless of where you are, what you're doing, you're thinking there's a good spot. There's a good spot. If it happens now, I'm going there. And even you can fly past that spot and go, the wind's, it's a tailwind. That spot's still the best spot.
Because you can turn around into wind.
You can be a couple of 100 metres past, you can be half a kilometre past, 5,000 feet or whatever, and go, I can make it back to that spot because that's the only spot that I can make it to.
Yeah.
Some of the country in New Zealand's pretty rugged.
I remember flying out between Gundawindi and Toowoomba, and there's a lot of forestry out there, and it was the same deal. I remember, I wasn't giving it really a second thought, and the instructor said to me, "Where are you going to land? Engine failure. Where are you going to land?" And I was like, it caught me off guard, and it was like, well, there's a hole in the trees over there, and he's like, it's the only place.
Yeah.
And then doing my night rating, and I'd flown north out of Toowoomba. We were heading up towards Kingaroy, and we ended up, he threw a diversion, and I had to divert out to Dolby, but that's by the by.
Yeah.
The instructor said, "Where are we right now?" And I said, we're right over the Kuya Ranges, which I knew because I'd driven them many a time. And he said, and it's night, it was pitch black.
Yeah.
What would you do if you had an engine failure? And I said, probably die, because at night you can't see.
Nah. And that's what they tell you, even in a helicopter, pick a nice black spot. Close to a road,
hope there's nothing there.
If there's a light source something there, it might be on the side of a hill, but there's a light source there, so go there. And even during the daytime, you hopefully you've flown many routes many times, and you start to know the topography of the ground and the route and the roads and things like that. And it's difficult doing cross countries where you've never been to that place before. And sometimes I would do my flight planning based around roads in New Zealand. Like you literally, if you're flying from Auckland to Napier or Gisborne or somewhere like that, you're going to probably fly over small settlements and track over roads and things like that just in case.
I watched a guy last weekend on Flight Aware. I saw this R44 was flying down to Warwick, and I was like, I didn't know the rego. I went and then did a rego search.
Yeah.
And found that it was the flight director for the company that I used to fly for. And I was like, oh, he's out and about.
Yeah.
And so then I watched him for the day, and he left Warwick and he flew down to Gatton and then flew back to Toowoomba.
Okay.
And his track, the weather wasn't great that day, but he was in a hilo, so, he's got options. And I watched his track, and his track from Warwick down to Gatton pretty much followed a road. And I thought, my brain being fixed wing, he must be scud running. But talking to you now, he was giving himself options to land.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
If he was smart, he was. It could have been he might have been scud running. Who knows?
Who knows?
We've all done that. But and it's drummed into you, engine failure. It could be an
especially
engine failure.
in a single.
And yeah, 100%. And piston.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you have any emergencies in your experience?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about it?
Yep, sure. So my first emergency, well, it wasn't an emergency. It was, I was on a training flight with an instructor, and we were doing a cross country, and it took us back over Auckland International Airport. And so we had to hold above the tower at 1,000 feet. And before we were given clearance. Now, so we
like literally in a hover
above the tower, waiting for traffic.
Ah, right.
And so I'm in a hover, and so I had control. He's just along for the ride because I was probably at 140, 145 hours at that time. We were ticking off remaining boxes that needed to be ticked.
Yep.
And we were given clearance. So I'm sitting in a hover at 1,000 feet, and I get the clearance, and I remember the aircraft, Hotel Papa Kilo, cleared direct Ardmore, and it's probably a 10-minute flight from where we were. As soon as I pulled in a little bit of power and nosed over, it started running real rough, and I realized something was wrong, and so I entered an auto rotation, and Keith, the instructor, said, that's running really rough, good option. And I actually did an auto rotation, knowing that I had power at the end of it. The engine's still running, but it was, rough as.
Crook, yeah.
It was very crook, and I did my flare just before the domestic helipad, put it down on the domestic helipad, and then we shut it down. It pretty much shut itself down. And so we had the magnetos on the right side, 2 magnetos gone. We didn't know that until the next day. We had to call an engineer out, but we didn't want to call Mayday or anything like that, or even a pan. It was just kind of like Auckland Tower, we've had to change our flight plan. We're now putting down on the domestic helipad. And they all went, are we supposed to get emergency services rolling for you type of thing? We're like, negative at this point. It's, and we're on the ground. 10 seconds. It was done. 10 seconds, it was over. We're on the ground. No need. We're not on fire or anything like that. But, a lot of paperwork got avoided that night.
Yeah.
So, and all the engineers had gone from base. So they went out the next morning and determined that it was the magnetos, and we'd lost the starboard side of the engine. Yeah, it was one of those things that happened very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a good wake-up call to how quickly something could go wrong. We're in a 1,000-foot hover over Auckland Tower, Auckland International Airport, and as soon as we nose over, pull in a little bit of power, and half the engines failed. So I haven't had a full engine fail, but I have had a half engine failure. And it wasn't scary or anything like that. It was like, like I say,
you're training
pretty experienced at doing autos at that time. And Keith, being the instructor, he didn't even touch the controls. He just kind of went, hey, we're diverting to the helipad. And by that stage, we were on the ground, 10, 15 seconds max, and it was done and over.
What's the kind of rate of descent in an auto rotation?
It depends on the aircraft. Like you do an auto in a Huey with massive inertia in those rotor blades, and you can almost pull in a normal approach in them. Like it's power off, but the inertia in those blades is. I went for a ride in a Huey. This is one of my good stories. I went for a ride in a 205 B model, and the guy had been flying them since Vietnam, so he's really experienced. And I just went for a bit of a blat with him one day. Didn't even log it. Should have logged it, but
should have logged it.
He gave me the stick for a little while, and I flew around a little bit. But then he said, "Hey, watch this," and we did an auto down to the ground. He put it on the ground, kept the engine rolled back to flight idle, picked it up, did a 360 and put it back down again. That's how much inertia there is in those rotor blades.
Holy cow.
So, but a Hughes 300, 500, Bell 407 will not do that. You're going to sink real quick. So it might be 2,000 feet a minute above material that you're going down at. It might be 1,500 to 2,000 feet a minute type of thing. So your options, and you can adjust certain things like pull in a bit of collective, your speed and everything is a big factor in how quickly you descend. Or sometimes you want to go down fast. Sometimes you'll pull S turns and 180s and 360s to get to that spot quicker, depending on where the spot is, the safest spot to land type of things. At night, I did quite a bit of night frost flying over orchards and things like that to circulate the air to keep the frost off them. I think, I probably logged
that's
50. Yeah, that's a thing. And so I did that. And so at nighttime, you're hovering over orchards at 100 feet, circulating the air. If you have an engine failure, you're going to do what's called a zero speed auto, which is basically you're just going to sink down, and at the last minute you're going to pull in collective. And essentially, because you're in a hover at 100 feet, you're going to push over as much as you can to get a little bit of airspeed. But at the end of the day, at 100 feet, your engine fails, you do not have a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's basically you're on the ground very quickly. So that was my one engine half failure. I know there's probably guys that have had 3 or 4 in their lifetimes with 20,000 hours or whatever, and some who have flown 20,000 hours and never had one. The chief pilot where I learned to fly was an an ex-Royal Air Force test pilot in the 50s. He did a lot of the testing on the Concorde engines.
Yeah.
They flew Vulcan bombers and tested the Concorde's engines on those. So he
flew Vulcan bombers.
Yeah, he was and Sabres, F-86 Sabres.
Yeah, right.
And so he went supersonic. He had his supersonic thing on the board where he went, in a dive, and a pretty steep dive from what I understand, went supersonic in that. So he got his Mac Busters Club thing. So he had that on the wall at the office. And he was both a fixed wing test pilot for the RAF and also a helicopter test pilot for the RAF. And he'd never had an engine failure in any aircraft he'd flown, and he was getting up there in hours, like 20,000 hours of flying. So over a very long career.
Very fortunate.
Yeah.
I remember being told pretty early on in my training days by one of the instructors, he just said, one day you will have an engine failure.
Yeah.
You're flying long enough, you will have an engine failure. And that kind of freaked me out.
Yep.
But it makes it real, right? And that's the freaking you out. It's like, okay, I just need to be prepared.
Yep.
And your training kicks in.
Yeah. And like anytime you get an opportunity to do an auto rotation, do one. It's not going to wreck the machine. Training. Yeah, just refreshing it.
So I think I know what a 300 is. A 300's kind of, I'm not a helicopter guy, right?
Yep.
A 300's kind of like the helicopter that I would have seen in MASH.
No, that's a Bell 47.
But kind of like a bubble canopy.
It's a bubble canopy, three-bladed. The C model has you can take the right-hand pilot's collective and cyclic and pedals out, and you can actually fit a person in the middle. There's a little seat, so it becomes a 3-seater, and which is a bonus.
And so then the 500, the Hueys 500, that's turbine or not?
Yeah, it is.
That's like what I would have seen in.
That is the Ferrari of helicopters.
They use those in Vietnam, I believe.
Yeah, they called them Loaches back then.
Right.
OH6s, Little Birds. They use them now. All the Special Forces guys fly them, and they make a few adjustments to them, to make them a little bit quieter and to their handling and things like that. But Hueys 500.
So you've got time in the Hueys 500?
I got to fly the very first 500 NOTAR in the Southern Hemisphere. It got brought down. It was Hotel Mike Delta, MD.
Yeah, right.
And that got shipped over here to Australia and sold in Australia. When it was demonstrated over here, somebody went, I've got the cash, I'll buy that, I'll take that off your hands. And so I've flown the N model just a little bit, but I was a student pilot then when I got to fly that, believe it or not.
That would have been pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
So did you get a type rating in it, or just that experience?
I never did a type rating in the 500, but we had a Jet Ranger there that was online, so I flew the Jet Ranger. I did my type rating in that. The only other turbine experience apart from that Huey that I told you in is Bell 407. One of the instructors, the guy that I was with when we had that partial engine failure, he was the private pilot for a big famous banking family in New Zealand, and he was their chauffeur in their Bell 407. And that is like if the 500 is the Ferrari, then the Bell 407, as far as I'm concerned, is like the Cadillac.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful machine to fly. But I don't have a type rating in it. I just, every now and then I'd get to come along for a bit of a fly.
Did you log time?
Yeah, I logged my time
Nice.
on that. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely did. It was very generous of him to think of me on these ferry flights.
So you haven't flown in some time?
No, there's no money in flying, Damo, especially helicopters. So I can give you an example. I started to get a little bit frustrated with the industry. It's like you spend and I'm going to tell all you young pilots out there that are listening, you spend all this money, you get made all these promises. Well, these promises are probably lies. In my instance, I was lucky to log a couple of 100 hours after my commercial license because I'd put some plans in place beforehand. And I was about to do my instructor's rating and I got shafted. So I did all the hours that I need. I have all the hours I need to do my instructor's rating, still have that obviously. But that company that I was flying for was not loyal to me. You know, they somebody else came in and waved some more money at them and they went with that. And so, you know, these guys that were my friends and things like that, you sort of learn it's a business. And you're just a young pilot. Somebody's always going to work for less money. And I'm grateful now at the ripe age of nearly 53 that I could go in and go, I don't need to get paid. I'll sweep your floors. I don't need to get paid because I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a student debt that I have to take care of. I've made some money outside. I've made some good decisions. Bad decision was getting into debt to learn to fly helicopters.
Yeah.
And you struggle for a lot of years thereafter. My advice to anybody is work for 10 years, earn the money to do your commercial license. Don't take out a student loan. Be 30 years old, have some life experience and not be reliant on having to sweep the floors and get treated like crap by people. Be able to walk away from a job where they're not being safe. So I'd done a couple of jobs that I thought were a little bit sketch. And then I realized that on one of these jobs, got sent down to pick up an old Hueys 300 from Wanganui, which is on the west coast, very rugged country. And so they actually said to me, hey, can you go and pick up this aircraft? Oh, and can you fly yourself down there on tomorrow's Air New Zealand flight? You pay for the flight to go down there. And I'm like, no, you want me to pick up this helicopter that is coming up to be refurbished and resold? You buy my ticket down there. And at that point, I was a little bit dejected with some of the jobs that I was doing and the way that I was being treated. So after much wrangling, guess what? They paid for my ticket to go and pick up this thing. They were just being cheap. Nick will go down there. He'll pay for his airfare. It's only $90 or something. It might have been $70. I don't care. But the principle at that point was, no, I'm not putting up with this. And I've come to find out that this helicopter had been thrashed. And the first question that these guys asked me when they drove me an hour out of Wanganui into the bush, and it was an old house, and it was this 300 sitting on a tennis court there, an old rundown tennis court that hadn't been used in years. All the wire was, for the fencing was rusted out and things like that, and sort of gave me a little bit of an indication as to what sort of operation these guys were running. And it was a big logging thing, and I'd done a little bit of logging, strop running and things like that, which is where the helicopters used to have the long lines on the big aircraft, and they use a little aircraft to go and pick up the strop and take it back, and so you're ferrying the cables. The cable. Yeah, the cables for right. And so they'd use this 300 for strop flying and for inserting workers and things like that for a number of years, and probably the maintenance records weren't that great on it and things like that. But you get in, you check everything, any problems with no, she runs beautifully, blah 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 blah, and the radio will be a bit crackly when you take off because you're a long way out, but New Plymouth is you'll get good reception once you come into there. They're giving me all these excuses and I'm starting to get a little bit worried. But they said, hey, do you want to go tuna boat flying? And I went, And they go, it's $75,000 a year and it's US dollars, it's offshore, so it's tax free. And I went, give me the number. They gave me the number. I jump in the machine. They fueled it up for me. I checked everything, went over it, pre-flighted everything. Everything looked good. And sure, turn the radio on and it's a bit crackly. Well, it wasn't working very well, that radio, and I had 3 hours of flying ahead of me above some of the most rugged country between Wanganui and Hamilton, Auckland, but I was going to go via Hamilton. I knew I had enough fuel to get to Hamilton, right? And so I'm flying over this dodgy country looking at places to auto-rotate and knowing that if I have to go in, if I have an engine failure, I'm at the bottom of a gorge and head in whatever direction. It's the same distance. It's probably a couple of 100 Ks
to anywhere. And you can't radio anyone. There's no such thing as a 406 beacon or anything like that, satellite phones and things like that. So I head off on this journey and I can see Hamilton Airfield. It's probably 10 Ks away. I was about to make a radio call. It was very crackly. The radio's not working real great. And all of a sudden I hear this another crackle in my ear, and I see this orange light on the warning light come on. And I look at it and it says fuel low, but I look at the gauge and it says 13 US gallons still in the tank. And I'm like, what's going on here? That's like 50 litres.
Yeah. I'm sitting there going, I'm 5 minutes from landing, but a warning light comes on. Trust the warning light over what the gauge says.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing that even as a junior pilot, I thought the warning light could be faulty because the gauge is showing me 13 US gallons still. I know I've still got an hour's endurance left in me. And I erred on the side of caution. I entered an auto rotation, found a spot, a farmer's driveway, a big patch of grass on the side of the driveway leading up to the house. And I did an auto rotation, pulled it into a hover, and then a car is coming up the driveway. So I thought, maybe I'll just adjust my position further away from the driveway. So I picked it up into a hover again and moved maybe 2 meters to the left, and the engine quit.
Far out.
And I did have it wasn't an engine failure, but the juice wasn't flowing. And so pretty good decision for me.
Mm.
So the farmer's wife said, she'll take me into Hamilton. It's a 5-minute drive into the airfield, took the fuel card, got 20 litres of fuel, borrowed a jerry can, took it back, put 20 litres in, then picked it up, flew it to Hamilton, juiced up again. Got to Ardmore later in the day. They kind of said, hey, that took a while. What happened? And but one of them said, "Oh, you made it," which indicated to me they knew that this aircraft was dodgy.
Yeah.
Who can we get to go and fly it? And it was like the junior boy.
Mm.
And I was just like, man, they knew that there was a real possibility that I wasn't coming home from that flight, and they joked about it. And so I threw the keys across the desk and said, "Don't call me anymore." Walked away basically from the industry at that point.
Yeah.
A lot of guys will put up with that sort of stuff. But the funny thing was, I thought I've got somewhere to go. I've got this tuna boat. And I did. I had a gig lined up on a tuna boat flying out of Guam. Had to be there at a certain time and date. Had a job sorted out. Met my wife that night. And thought, if I go away for 6 months on a tuna boat, she ain't going to be here when I get back. Fell in love.
So what next for you? Like, where do you want to go? You mentioned before you're nearly 53.
Yeah, nearly 53.
I know we've talked.
I had big plans, I've done okay financially. And so I thought to myself, I've got a few options at the moment. I'm in a position now where I don't have to get paid to fly. I would like to get my license back. Like, I'm in the process of getting my medical back at the moment. I have all my ASICs and everything done. I have money in the bank that I can spend on getting up to speed again.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to spend 10, 20 hours flying to get back to where I was, I can. Now I kind of feel like I don't really want to do it as a career. Like, aviation now is something that I can do. It's not something that I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I might just feel like buying a small helicopter and doing some flying. Or paying once or twice a month to go for a surf somewhere, whatever the options are, I can do that now. But yeah, I'm just waiting to see what happens with this economy and things like that at the moment. That's where I'm at. I would like to volunteer as a co-pilot, even on a rescue chopper. You know, I could do an instrument rating. I could do dual pilot rating, all that sort of stuff. I can afford to fly now, whereas I couldn't before.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of options for me. Well, I think there's options for me. Maybe there's not.
Couple of questions then.
Go.
You've told us about what I would consider a pretty memorable experience and about that Hueys 300 up into Hamilton.
Yeah.
Have you got any other memorable experience you had flying a particular airframe and what made it special? So you've talked about I think it was a 406.
407.
The 407.
Yeah, the 407. Yeah, that's a beautiful machine. The NOTAR was cool fun. I've done some really interesting, like even in my short career, I did some really interesting jobs. Like you fly, like I say, those fishing trips, you fly out over the Hauraki Gulf in New Zealand and you will see whales, you'll see massive pods of hammerhead sharks, killer whales, dolphins, you know, like just the beauty of the place that you're flying. And I have been out west, you know, I've done, I'm a keen hunter and shooter. The sunsets here in Australia in the outback are more beautiful than anything I've seen anywhere in the world. And so, like, even though it's a dusty, arid sort of place from time to time, the beauty of Australia, you know, I look forward to doing some flying here. I reckon it's a beautiful spot to fly. And so, you know, one of the jobs I did was sling loading dynamite into a dam. They wanted to blow up all the tree stumps and create a hole in the ground. That was one of the very first jobs that I did, was sling loading some dynamite.
We got dynamite. Who we get to do that? Oh, Nick.
That's right. Nick will do it. Send the junior guy, you know. But I had my sling rating, and the company I was working for had the dangerous goods.
Yeah.
I've done aerial photography jobs where, you know, photographing houses. I was in a big aviation magazine that was doing a write-up on Hueys 300s or Schweitzer 300s in New Zealand, and I was photographed in that. I've been photographed on a magazine, Wing and Rotor, or Rotor and Wing. I can't remember which one it is now, but I was on the front page of that as a junior pilot in the NOTAR.
Poster boy.
Yeah, it was quite funny, you know, like here I am just getting into the industry, and there's, you know, Worldwide magazine had me on the cover and a little white Hueys 300, trucking along above the countryside of New Zealand. And
that's cool.
The frost flying is really interesting, hovering at night. Everybody runs out of fuel at the same time, believe it or not. You know, if you've got 2.5 hours endurance, and the frost flying starts at 9 p.m. because it's going to freeze, everybody's cranking at the same time and everybody's rushing back to the fuel bowsers at the same time. And you'll be lined up at 1 a.m. with 2 squirrels, 2 jet rangers, half a dozen 300s, and probably some Robinsons nowadays, you know, all waiting to get fuel, lining up. Everybody's, you know,
leapfrogging as they go.
Leapfrogging up to the bowser and filling up, and interesting stuff like that. It's quite good fun, you know.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Never even considered frost flying. But I guess I live
there's an
in
inversion layer
Queensland.
at about 100 feet above the crop, you know, like the cooling at night, the heat rises, and you're literally looking at your temperature gauge, and you'll see it'll, you know, like you'll go from -2 degrees to 5 degrees at 100 feet.
So you're just pushing the warm air down.
You're pushing the warm air down, making sure that and you're just hovering back and forward in lines and grids over these apples, oranges, pears, you name it. And
holy cow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's an expensive way to get warm air down, but I guess lose a crop and it's more expensive.
When you've got thousands of acres, and most of the time what they do is they'll burn diesel in drums to create, and so you'll see the warm air going up, and then you'll see the inversion layer because the smoke spreads out sideways, and so that's an indicator. But they're also burning these drums to create heat above so that you can circulate it. So, because, you know, sometimes it'll get, you know, -5, -10 degrees.
Wow.
And you'll have, you know, some of the places you'll have 5 or 6 helicopters flying, and you get given your airspace to fly in, your crops, you know, and everybody's communicating with each other and talking to each other about where they are, and you're looking at your knee map going, or your knee board going, okay, well, I'm in 1A. so-and-so's in 2B and they intersect. And so, you're looking out for traffic and, where am I going to go next? And it's interesting stuff.
That's interesting flying. You talked about that flight from Hamilton. My next question is, what's one of your most fear-filled flight experiences? I imagine that'd have to be...
My first couple of flights are, like when your first solo, I'm going to say, guy gets out and you're on your own. As much as you're eagerly anticipating that and you think you know it all at that point, when he actually hops out and you don't have that crutch to lean on,
True.
That was interesting. But at the same token, it was cool. You take off, you do that circuit, and you come back and hover, and he's pointing, go and do it again, and then he starts walking back to the base, and that was cool. But fear-filled. Sometimes the most fear that you get is I got a bit of vertigo once.
Yeah, right.
I was flying up the face of this mountain, and so I'm at low level, essentially climbing in the mountains, and then all of a sudden you come to a cliff face on the other side, and it drops off 3,000 feet, and so you're at low level, and then you pop out. That shocked me the first time. It was kind of like, whoa! You go from 50 feet to 3,000 feet like that. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, did that just happen? So that was one of the things where I got a fright when I was flying. The little light coming on in the the little orange light coming on.
Yeah.
I've had a tail rotor transmission warning light come on twice, and I in the 300, that happened twice in the 300. The first time it came on, it was when I was frost flying. And in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., this light comes on, and that's a shut down. Check the chip light, you got to remove the wire, check the chip light, reinstall the wire. So the engineer had showed me how to do all that, because that was a possibility. And so that coming on at night, there was a little crackle in my earpiece. All of a sudden I heard this crackle and saw the light at the same time. And then the second time that happened, same thing. I'm flying along and I hear this crackle and bright light, and I literally thought, I know what that crackle is. I can't see the light, and I actually had to shield the warning light with my hand to because of the glare that I was getting straight into the sun. And sure enough, yes, the chip light was on. So I've had tail rotor chip light come on twice. Never a main transmission.
Any kind of warning light would be a concern though.
Yeah.
Once again, knock on wood, I've not had one.
Yeah, and even when I was doing my Jet Ranger type rating, literally sitting in the hover, all warning lights are out, nosed forward, warning light comes on. And it was a fuel sensor of some sort, as far as I remember. But we were lucky we were in the circuit, and we just turned around, went over to the workshop that serviced the Jet Ranger, and plonked it down there and said, we've had this chip light come on, fix it. And an hour later, we were back in the circuit. If
you were given the opportunity, expense-free, to get a type rating in any airframe, could be fixed wing, could be
Black Hawk. Yeah, Black Hawk. Private Black Hawk would be cool. That'd be where I'm at.
What advice would you give to someone starting out in aviation? You've already given some advice.
Yeah. Do your due diligence is what I tell anybody getting into any business. Do your due diligence. Don't take anybody's word for it. Like if they say there's a shortage of pilots, go out and test that theory. So you'll know that there are helicopter jobs out there. If you're going to start a business selling ice to Eskimos, do your due diligence and find out how much ice they actually need in the Arctic. Do you know what I mean? Do they need helicopter pilots in the Northern Territory at the moment? Well, there's only one way to find out. And don't take the guy who's got a helicopter flight school in Sydney's word for the fact that you'll get a job in the Northern Territory. Fly to the Northern Territory, rent a car, and go and talk to the helicopter operators up there before you do your license. Don't take anybody else's advice for it. I'll tell you what's funny is, how I told you that the best man at my dad's wedding ended up being Air Pacific. Air Pacific, yeah. He was their chief pilot. I was flying joyrides at Ardmore in this little 300 on an open day, and I was busy for 6 hours flying. It was great. New commercial pilot getting 6 hours on a Saturday and Sunday, whatever it was. And then this guy comes up and he goes, "Oh, what's your name?" I said, "Nick Bowie." "Are you related to Peter?" "Peter was my dad." He goes, "I was your dad's best man at his wedding." And I said, "Really?" I said, "My mum's around here somewhere." And he goes, "Is she?" I said, "Yeah, I took her for a fly earlier." We have this little get together.
Yeah.
And he goes, do you have your commercial fixed wing license as well? And I said, no, just helicopters. And he goes, oh, that's a shame. I said, why? And he goes, well, I could have put you in a 737.
Oh.
Didn't matter how many hours you had. I'm the boss.
Yeah.
And all you would have needed was an instrument rating and my endorsement, and you could have been.
It.
So I was, I look back on that going, opportunity lost, because I like these things that beat the air into submission.
Yeah. Oh well, opportunity.
Opportunity.
Hey?
What if?
Well,
knowing what I know now,
and circumstances change, right?
Yeah.
So my end goal was to fly for the Flying Doctors, fly the King Air.
Yeah.
Like to me, that was just the epitome of awesome flying because it's so varied, right? And so that's why I went into the Caravan, which was flying skydivers, which I didn't want to fly. Like I told myself, I'm not doing parachute jumps. Yeah. I'm going to go the commercial route, the normal charter and whatnot.
Yeah.
But no, this opportunity came up and I was very thankful for the opportunity, to be honest. It's a beautiful airplane to fly, although parachute jump flying, it's fairly fear-filled.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yes, when your whole windscreen is full of ground as you're on your way down in a van, on VNE the whole time.
Yeah.
But, so I was going to go from there, and then I had a friend. He was working for a company called Eastern Well, and they were flying King Airs. Mm-hmm. So he got me in contact with the chief pilot there, rang him up, said, this is what I'm doing. I'm flying these Caravans. I've just started out in them. I want to fly for the Flying Doctors, but I want to come through Eastern Well. What do I do? And he said, get 750 hours in the van, go get 500 hours on a twin, and you've got a job. Come see me and I'll employ you. Yeah. So I was like, oh, sweet. Because then once you're in the King Airs, do 3,000-4,000 hours on those, and then you got this ticket potentially into the Flying Doctors, and then, find out the wife's pregnant with number 5, and that kind of
squashes things. Yeah, that's right. I know. You pivot. You're forced to pivot very quickly. Yeah, like if I had it to do over, I'd do it differently. Unfortunately, there's really no do-overs. I can't identify as a 23-year-old anymore, if you know what I mean. Like my body is not 23. And
whatever your tick is going, though, you've got the opportunity.
That's right. Yeah, and if you can get I know guys here on the Sunshine Coast who are 70 odd years old and they've still got their medicals and they still fly. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, if I could spend the next 20 years in aviation still, you can amass a lot of hours in 20 years of flying. Yeah,
and I think I mentioned in the podcast that I just did about myself, it's all about the right time and the right way.
Yeah, and even then, some of the medicals that you can get has to be supervised or fly as a co-pilot type of thing. Well, somebody who's 75, who's still sharp, who can still do day-to-day stuff, can sit in the passenger seat of a rescue helicopter.
Yes.
And you've got
radios,
radios and things like that. And you've got a lifetime of experience sitting there next to you if you have an emergency or or who can help you make the right decision, as opposed to, like I say, the 20-year-old who's just like, let's do it. Let's get it.
That's some incredible insights. Thanks so much for your time.
No problem. We've got plenty of it at the moment. The semi-retirement gig is pretty cool. So
honestly, Nick, if anyone gets to know you, they'll have an asset if they will put you in their chopper. Yep. So I think you've shown it a few times in the last 30 minutes that we've chatted or so, and that is that you're no nonsense. You tell it how it is. Yeah. And to be honest, that's what you want. You need no nonsense.
And that is an age and experience thing as well. And don't get me wrong, some 21-year-olds have got their lives together. And so I'm not going to take that away from them. Sometimes, the 21-year-old might be more mature and more capable.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the HiflyMedia Podcast, Nick. Your aviation journey is both inspiring and informative, and I'm sure our listeners will benefit from hearing about your experiences. Thanks so much. We'll have to have a chat again another time.
Yes, for sure.
Thanks for tuning in to the HiflyMedia Podcast with our guest, Nick Bowie. Hope you've enjoyed listening to Nick's insights and experiences as a commercial helicopter pilot and successful entrepreneur. Join us next time for more fascinating discussion. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform and leave a review to help spread the word. The HiflyMedia Podcast, uncovering the people and passion behind aviation, one story at a time.